Welcome everybody to my webinar on application documents. As the weeks kind of start winding down here into the new year, these are going to be super important to a lot of people who are trying to put their finishing touches on their grad school applications. And so since I'm kind of here as a resource for a lot of you guys to have someone take a look at your application documents and then provide feedback to help you guys with either grammar and spelling or more major things like organization, then I thought this would be a very helpful kind of overview of what not only I will be looking for, but what the admissions committees are often looking for in these documents, which may not always be super inherent when you're writing them the first time. So, what are the things that you're going to need to apply? Usually you will be asked for either a personal statement or a statement of purpose, sometimes both, and I'll briefly discuss the difference between the two. There will be letters of recommendations, usually 2 to 3. You'll need to submit either a resume or a CV. And then occasionally they will also ask for program-specific essays or a portfolio demonstrating previous work, your test scores, and official transcripts. And these first 3 are the 3 that I'm going to cover because those are the ones that I can speak more in depth on. So first are personal statements. So these are a very important part of your application because they're what tells the committee the most about you from yourself. So these are very personal, and basically anything that you want the committee to know that you can't put anywhere else in your application should go in here. And usually there's not a ton of space, so you have to make these very concise and really grab their attention because you need to demonstrate, one, that you're a memorable person that is worth taking the time to read through your application and to potentially fund to go to their school, but also 2, that you really want to go to their school. And so what you have here are 2 different types. There's personal statements, which are more narrative based, and so you'll have like more anecdotes about your past experiences, your future goals, and how they relate to this graduate school program. And so these also usually come with a particular prompt that the graduate school is asking you to answer. Statement of purposes tend to focus more on your reasons to applying to grad school and less on like the past and the anecdotes. And so these are the ones where you're going to want to clarify what your career or research goals are. So what is it that you're hoping to accomplish at this university? Kind of expand upon what your research is. One second. Are you guys all able to hear me? I just got a notification that my internet's unstable.
Yes, we can hear you. A little bit interrupted, but it's okay.
Okay, cool. Sorry. There's a winter storm here in Illinois, so if I cut out for whatever reason, that would be why. Sorry. Anyway. For your personal statements, you're going to be kind of wanting to ask yourself kind of these questions and seeing as you're reading through your essay, does your essay really answer any of these questions? So what professors are you wanting to work with there at the university? Graduate students often work with 1 or multiple professors, and so if you want to go to a particular program because there's a professor that you're really interested in working with, then you should really highlight that in your essay. And then explain why you value their work or wish to study with them. Or maybe the program has something that's very special to you and they have particular courses or concentrations that you know that this program has and you can't find it anywhere else. Or explaining how this program is going to advance your goals, how you can contribute to it. But above all, make sure that you answer the prompt, because you can write a fantastic essay, but if you're not actually answering their question, then they're going to notice that. And so if you're looking through these questions and you realize that you've written a really long essay and it tells all about your life story, but it doesn't really talk about the school program at all, then kind of ask yourself, how can you incorporate in like a paragraph or two about how you would fit in with the program and how the program fits into your life. Because they're really going to be looking at how is this program going to benefit you? You're telling a story about how you've gotten to where you are, but how is this going to be that next step? And how do you see yourself in that program? And by doing this, you really demonstrate that, one, you know the program, and two, you actually want to go here and you're not just sending out a bunch of generic essays. And so each essay should be tailored, at least at the end, towards each school that you're applying to. So some common mistakes that you see for personal statements is that you give too many details from your childhood. Try and stick with one or two stories that have really impacted who you are today and what your goals are. Whenever I'm reading a personal statement, I don't need to know your entire life story. So if you're starting back at the time you're 5 and giving me every detail up until you're 40, then it's less effective than if you give me maybe one or two very personal anecdotes in detail. If your entire life, they'll probably ask you more questions about that once you get the interview. But this personal statement is so that way you can introduce yourself and kind of give them that little teaser. So they don't need to know everything. And it's much more effective if you can give more recent examples of why it is that you need to go and get a master's in accounting or a master's in global affairs. Other problems are that there's no overarching narrative. And so if you're telling two stories, but neither of them have any relation to each other. And so one of them is I'm giving a story about how I grew up on a bee farm, and then the other one is me talking about, I don't know, reading books in a library. Then I say that I would love to go and get a master's in accounting. None of those really work together, especially if I didn't tie them into each other. And so if you're not giving some overarching narrative about why it is that you want to go into accounting, and you're giving some random background stories that don't really make sense with your long-term goals, then those stories aren't really the ones you want to tell. And so the admissions committee will be confused as to why it is they're hearing about these stories. And like I said, never mentioning the program you're applying for. If they go through and they read an entire essay and they know all about you, but they've never once even heard school and they don't know that you're applying to the University of Illinois, then that's a huge problem because part of this is to relay what you are applying for and what it is you're hoping to get out of it. And so I have this kind of picture over here of kind of how normal people tell stories. And I think a lot of times we kind of get wrapped up in talking about ourselves. And so instead of going from the start of our story to the end of our story being like, this is where I first got interested in accounting, and here is where I am now and where I want to be, we kind of go on a little windy path of this is everything that's ever happened to me ever. And so if this is how you feel like you're writing, then maybe start going through your essay and start pulling out which bits of information are important and which ones aren't. Common mistakes, your essay sounds super generic. So you really want to show who you are and give them something new to read, because they're going to be asking questions about will you fit into their program, what do you bring into it. And so if you're just kind of writing more broad information about either your community or your country, and you realize that you're not really in your essay, then that's a problem because they want you to talk about yourself and not other people or trends and stuff necessarily in your country or your community, but talking about how you interact with those bits of information. And then finally, spelling and grammar mistakes. So essentially, if you have major spelling and grammar errors in your essay, those are going to be seen as kind of reflections on the quality of work that you'll present at graduate school. So poorly edited essays are going to be seen as submissions of poorly written work in your graduate program, and so you're less likely to be admitted, especially if there are significant errors, which that case your applications are likely to kind of be thrown away entirely. So this is where you kind of need to take time with your essay, really go over it, have other people go over it. By all means, please send them to me. Once you think that your essay is completed and you would like someone to give you substantial advice and how to either clean it up or to make sure that there isn't any spelling, grammar errors, please, please, please go ahead and send them my way. That's what I'm here for. I've helped a couple people already with theirs. And then hopefully you guys will be writing these well in advance, and then you will have a lot of the just common mistakes really out of the way earlier on, so that way when it comes down to the deadline, you're not rushing to finish this, kind of like this poor man over here who thinks that his writing is a masterpiece and then wakes up the next morning and realizes it makes absolutely no sense. So some tips for success with the personal statement. Please ask your friends and family to read your personal statement. Don't hide it away and be embarrassed by anyone to read it, because the more eyes that you have on a paper, the better that it is. Usually not everyone catches the same thing. So while I might read through and catch a lot of your grammar and spelling mistakes, I might not know a whole lot about your personal life, and your friends and family can really add to helping you with your storytelling and narrative writing. Make sure that your stories are relevant, address anything that you think might be shortcomings, but make sure that you're framing those in ways that you overcame obstacles. So if you think that it's very important to explain to the committee that you've worked very long hours, and that resulted in your grades being lower than they would expect, then you can talk about that and then maybe frame it in a way to where you had to work those hours. And so like talking about how these were obstacles that you overcame, and then the committee can better understand why it is that you had maybe a 3.5 GPA as opposed to a 4.0 or any other such score. And so making sure that if you're highlighting those obstacles, put it in a positive manner and don't put yourself down, because then the committee sees you in a more negative light. Again, these are going to be they're not going to be long enough to tell everything about you. So you're not going to want to use filler words like and phrases that take up a ton of space. And then just keep drafting, editing, and rewriting these papers. And in order to do this, you do have to start with a lot of time ahead. Letters of recommendation. So these are really great opportunities to tell the committee about you that in areas that you can't necessarily put on your personal statements. So they're going to give insight into you from personal and academic standpoints, as opposed to the more personal one that you had just written about. And so you're often going to need to find 2 to 3 people of authority to write about you as a person in a strong and favorable way. So if you're looking at who to ask, if you've written like a dissertation or a thesis or done any kind of substantial research, then ask your advisor to write your letter of recommendation. If you volunteered or worked in a relevant position, then ask your employer or your supervisor. And if you've done particularly well in a course that's relevant to what you're hoping to pursue at grad school, then definitely get your professor, especially if he knows you super well. So when you're going through and you're trying to find people to act as those recommenders, then who are you looking for? Well, you want someone that knows you well, and they're able to speak about you from a position of authority. So if you're asking a professor to write you a letter of recommendation and you were in a 600-person lecture hall and they have no idea who you are, you're not going to get a very good recommendation, as opposed to if you ask a professor who you've had 3 or 4 small classes with and you have met with them one-on-one on several occasions and done research with them. That person is able to give much more in-depth and unique and personalized information about you, whereas the professor that taught a lecture of 600 people is not going to be able to give anything of substance. But you also can't ask your mom. So your mom might know you super, super well, and that's all great. But your mom's not someone of authority that can talk about you in a professional or academic sense. Even if your mom was like a professor, it's kind of seen as a conflict of interest. So don't ask like friends or family members to write your letters of recommendation. These should really be people that you work with and people of that taught your courses. But other things that you should be looking at is how well do they know you? Can they speak about work that you've done in their class? And can they talk about that work positively? And do they have a high opinion of you? Make sure that they know your educational and professional goals. So if you ask them to write a letter of recommendation for your accounting degree, do they know that you want to eventually work in the United States or in the UK, or do they know that you want to go and start your own business? What is it that your goals are? And make sure that they understand what those are, so that way they're not talking about something completely different than what you've listed in your personal statement. And then ask if they're able to write a good letter. So if you've noticed, sometimes you have supervisors who are great supervisors, but they're not necessarily the most articulate. And so if you have someone who's your employer, but they're not the best at writing, then they might not be the best person to write your letter of recommendation, because they might have amazing things to say about you, but if their ability to write isn't the best, then you might want to look towards people that are used to writing more letters of recommendation, so that way those opinions are much more highly presented to the application committees. So one thing to note though is you're probably not going to find one person that hits all of these, and you definitely won't find 2 to 3 people that hit all of these, but you will if you combine them together. So you want to try and have a person that's recommending you to have most of these in agreement when you ask that questions. But as long as all of these questions are covered by everyone in your list of people recommending you, then you should be good. Some common mistakes, I think, are especially receiving unflattering or generic letters. So this goes back to making sure the person knows you well. If they don't really know who you are, they can't give you anything that is unique about what you've done. And so my kind of rule of thumb is that if I take out your name and I put in my name, and that professor could definitely be talking about me, then the letter's not impressive. And therefore it's not going to be memorable. So if I am reading a letter and it's like, this person showed up every day to class and participated a ton and had a good final project, that's great. That letter of recommendation just said, yep, they're a good student and they did what they're supposed to. But it doesn't tell you anything about what it is that you contributed to the classroom, what made you special, how did you compare to other students in the class? Did the professor find you to be very knowledgeable about the subject? Did you add to classroom discussions in significant ways? if you did you get asked to follow up and do research with them or serve as a TA? Things like that are going to be much more substantial and informative to admissions committees than this person received a good mark in my class and I recommend them for your program. Also, what can hurt you is if your letters don't show a full range of skills. So you have 2 to 3 letters. You want them to kind of cover all of the aspects of your life that you can't really touch on too much in your personal statements. So you should have someone that's a professor that can talk about your academic abilities. If you're really looking for to do research at your graduate program, then have someone that can speak to your ability to do research. And if you're in more professional programs, then you need to have people that can speak to your experience. If you're applying for that master's in accounting, and both of your letters of recommendation, though, are from people that you worked with in the accounting world, then the graduate program doesn't know anything about your ability in the classroom. And so you need somebody that is a professor that can speak towards that. Don't wait until it's like the very end to ask for your letters of recommendation. These are favors that you're asking for other people to write on your behalf about you. And so it takes time to do these. They're not super high priorities, especially for professors who have a lot of other things to do. And so make sure that you're not getting too close to the deadline. Usually, bare minimum, give people about 2 weeks to write these letters of recommendation, but you should try and aim for at least a month, just so that way if something comes up, they have more time to do it, and it makes them feel less pressured when you ask. Because when people see that they have a month to write something, then if they're busy right now, then they know that they've got time still to write it later. And so you're usually able to get a much more positive response. If you ask someone to write it in a couple days or in a week because you've just waited till the last minute, they're much more likely to say no, or they're going to give you a really just standard letter of recommendation, and it's not going to be exceptional like you're looking for. And then don't provide your recommenders with unorganized or inaccurate documentation. So if they're going through and they're sitting down and wanting to write your letter and they can't find your transcript, or they don't know anything about you because they don't have their CV or your resume, then it's going to be difficult for them to write a good letter of recommendation, because they might know that you participate in some particular club or you're part of some professional society, but they might not remember exactly what it is. And so if they don't have this documentation, then they're not able to incorporate that into their letters, or they put in just incorrect information, which will then come across to the admissions committees, and they'll see that this professor may not even know you that well because they put in that you're president of the Glee Society, and maybe you're actually president of botany, which would be much more pertinent to your major if you're going into biology and plant studies. So what should you be providing your recommenders with? Give them a copy of your transcript and your admissions essays. Even if they're just drafts, let them know that they're draft essays, but this gives them an idea of who you are and what your goals are with that program, and it can really help them with their own recommendation writing. So this is another reason you should be working well ahead of time on your essays, so that way you can provide to your a lot of professors really like having those when they're writing them. Courses, remind them which courses you've taken with them. They might remember you in 1 or 2 of them, but it's super helpful if you've been in multiple. And so highlight that. Give them your resume and CV, and maybe a statement of your professional goals if they're not super elaborated on in your admissions essays, and then let them know the due date, along with giving them a list of the programs you're applying for. So that way they can kind of shape their recommendations to each of the schools by incorporating in the program names. So at the end, they might end up giving you 4 or 5 letters of different letters of recommendation, and each of them should have the school's name in it, but they won't know that what the school's name is if you don't give them which programs you're applying for. For CVs and resumes, I have a quick link that I want to go to. One second, let me stop sharing and then pull it up. So essentially, let's see if I can, yeah. So there's a bunch of websites that you can go to that'll talk about kind of what they look for in resumes and CVs. So I've pulled up what the graduate school for the University of Illinois kind of looks for and kind of what their recommendations are. And every university kind of has more or less their own kind of format they look at. And so these can serve as really great tools for you in your ability to kind of shape your own resume. And there's a certain forms that the United States kind of uses in general in terms of how we structure our resumes and CVs. And so one of this is your personal information, so age, marital status, hobbies, gender, sex, not important. I've noticed that a lot of people also put pictures on their resumes. Again, that's not a practice that we do here. So if you're kind of transferring over your information from your resume that you've used in Belarus and you're applying it to CVs and resumes when you're applying to schools here in the US, you don't need to put your age, your birthday, marital status, take your picture off because those aren't standard information that you're giving. But you do want to make sure that you have contact information. Education should be listed in a chronological order, and then list any relevant experiences that you've had. So these can be volunteer experiences, internships, have you participated in research labs, any sort of work that you've done. Those are all information that's required in your resume. And then if you've had any publications or you have particular skills that you want to highlight, so most of you should be that you're fluent in English or Russian or other languages outside of your native language that you want to highlight, or if you're in STEM and you're applying for maybe a master's in computer science, then you're going to want to highlight all of the software skills that you know. So are you proficient in C++ or Java or other software coding languages? And then any activities or leadership roles that you've played that you think are relevant to applying to graduate school. So you can go through and they usually give you kind of like different tips and just advice on how you should be kind of formatting your resume, and so what you should kind of be doing is and thinking about as you go through. So here they're talking about know your audience. So when you're applying, your resume isn't going to be the same for everything. So when I'm applying for a job, it's not the same as when I'm applying for graduate school. And so here's where you're going to want to kind of focus on more academic a more academic side of you, unless you're applying for a professional program. And then below that, we'll have examples that you can look at to show that you're or how you should be formatting your resumes. So this one is an example resume. The guy's name is Jordan Michaels. And so you can see here that he has a master's degree and a bachelor's degree. And so the master's degree is listed first and his bachelor's degree is listed second. And so you can see he bolds those titles, and then underneath it tells where he got those and gets his GPA I prefer seeing GPA on resumes as well, but if you think that your GPA is kind of a weak point in your application, then that might be something that you leave off. And so instead you would just have the title of the degree and where you got it, and then make sure that you put the date that you graduated. So for example, in mine, I haven't graduated yet, so it says expected graduation May 2020. But if you've already graduated, then you should have May 2019, May 2013, whatever it is, over here to the right. And then you'll see that any date that they have, it's always over here to the right. It's very easy to see when it is that people took these courses or they did these activities. So you know that they were client service associate from fall of, let's say, 2013 to present. And so this is kind of the structure that you're going to want to follow, is having the name of whatever you've done over here to the left, followed by the date on the right, and then having a series of bullet points underneath each of your little sections in order to elaborate on what you've done. And so each of these are started with what are called action words. So if you look at voter turnout quantitative research project, he starts with examined, used, reported. These action words are really essential to conveying what it is that you did. And so when you're going through here, you want to make sure that your action words are varied. So each of these start with examined. And hopefully, if you have a very good resume or cover letter, you won't have examined used again in your descriptions. So examined is used one time, and then you can see that the rest of these are all different action words. And so one thing that I will do is I'll put a bunch of these examples in a Facebook post, but I'll also include like a list of potential action words that you guys can use when you're writing resumes. And then you can pull from that list to try and use those to describe your different either employment experiences or research projects. And then hopefully that'll give you a much more varied looking resume, and it'll show much more diversity in what you've done, because when people are looking at your resume, it's usually not for very long, but if they notice that every single point has the word examined in it, then it's going to be looked on less favorably than if you're able to show that you have much more varied experiences since you're using all of these different action words. And then you can see that this person is highlighting different skills that are vital to his research. So Python, Excel, he's proficient in the Adobe Creative Suites. And then here's another one, PhD candidate, master's and bachelor's. If you have done a thesis in either your master's or bachelor's, then make sure to highlight that and give the title of your thesis. Also, if it's pertinent, you might also want to put the name of the advisor for your thesis. Underneath that, again, dates off on the right-hand side, and then the experience you have goes underneath that. And it's highlighted languages that she knows, so native speaker in English and Spanish, and then basic French. This is kind of my personal favorite style of writing resumes. They have the line underneath your titles of each of the sections. I think this is a lot cleaner, and I've seen most of the time when people are attending resume workshops here in the US, they've been really highlighting the use of this line of separation between the title and the first point of your next section. So between skills and cell biology, this line goes across the entire page, and that is kind of being seen as a much more clean resume. These ones above also are perfectly fine, but I've really noticed that people have been preferring to use ones that kind of break it up into these sections, and I think those lines are kind of the key to just creating like a visually better resume. This one does it as well, and so just something to keep in mind as you're looking to format yours. It's obviously not required, but I think it's starting to become kind of more preferred that you have those lines that go across. But with that, I have kind of covered everything that I wanted to highlight in my little discussion here, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask a bunch of questions if you had them. So whatever you guys have.
Thank you very much, Paisley. It was very useful for us. And I have the first question to you.
Everyone, sorry for coming so late today.
Okay. I have the first question. Some of our students are in active stage of application process to US institutions. So what are your plans for Christmas? I mean, are there any chances for you to review these documents? Let's say in which terms and when you will be out of job. So what you can advise in communication with you during this period of time?
Yeah, so I actually am pretty much done with this semester. I just have one more final on Thursday, and then after that, I don't have a whole lot of responsibilities until January 21st. So if you guys have documents that you wish to submit, I pretty much have an entire month that's more or less free to look over your guys' documents. So this would be kind of the time that I'd really recommend getting those in to look at, because I have an abundance of time up until January 21st, and then my university classes and stuff will start up again. So if you're looking for more attention and would like to work really one-on-one with me on your application documents, this is going to be probably the best time, this and the beginning of January. Obviously, as far as like Christmas goes, Christmas I will probably be spending with family, along with maybe the weekend before that. But other than that, please send your stuff, because I'm more than happy to take a look at them and help you with them.
Okay, thank you very much, because some of our staff members will disappear for a long time. So that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, I'm here, and I'll actually just kind of be sitting at home. So they give us like a month off in the middle of winter.
This is great news. Thank you so much. So any questions? Any ideas? Who is going to ask for help or submit documents? Okay, students will apply to you, and we're really looking for your help, especially in English grammar, also because you're a native speaker and now you are learning Russian. You know how it is difficult for us, for students, but they are well prepared. They will do their best. So basically, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. And if students will have questions, they will contact you directly. So, and we will continue our meeting today. Thank you so much.
Oh wait, I had one more thing that I forgot that I wanted to mention. So regarding letters of recommendation, since you brought up people with Russian, a lot of your people that you might be asking for letters of recommendation, they might not be either proficient in English or comfortable in writing letters of recommendation in English. So I wanted to let you guys know it's not expected that all of your people that are recommending you need to be fluent in English. And one thing that you should definitely do is reach out to each school that you're looking to apply to and ask what their procedure is. Some schools prefer that you send the letter of recommendation written in your native language because they might have someone that speaks that. Or they might ask you to submit the original letter of recommendation along with a translation. One thing to make very clear though is schools really don't like it when the students see their own letters of recommendation. So I strongly recommend going through and translating them yourself because they're very good at picking out if students have written their own letters of recommendation and then just had a student or had a professor sign off on it. So that should not be something that you're going for because it's going to result in applications just kind of being immediately rejected. I highly recommend reaching out to each of your schools and asking kind of what their preferred method is if whoever is sending you your letter of recommendation isn't able to write in English. If they are, and you want to give them my email and they want someone to go through and look at spelling and grammar mistakes, I'm more than happy to do that. They just need to send it to me so that way you're still not kind of having that overview of their work, because a lot of people don't really feel comfortable with writing letters of recommendation that the person they're recommending can then see. So yeah, if there's someone that is wanting to write, you want to write a letter of recommendation, and they would prefer someone to look over spelling and grammar for them, more than happy to look at that as well. But just a quick note that you should really reach out to your schools and talk to them about what their procedure is, so that way they don't think that you were kind of like super involved in the process because it's unethical to have students writing their own letters of recommendation.
Okay. Thank you so much. Any more questions, guys? No more questions. So we wish you a nice day and thank you for your
Awesome.
experience.
Cool. Thanks, Victor.
Thanks. Bye.